Thank you, Mr. Moodley. Good evening, Mr. Wilkes. Good evening, gentlemen. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you at this, the 102nd Old Boys Dinner. The last Old Boys Dinner we had was on Saturday, the 28th of November. It feels like just yesterday that I was sitting at the main table. Mr. Reeler was our guest speaker, and Mr. Schroeder was in good health. As a result of the year we have had and the restrictions in place at the time, there were only around 80 guests at that dinner. But having said this, we were all very excited about the fact that 2020 was drawing to a close. In November last year, the COVID numbers were steadily decreasing. The fact that we could look forward to a much more normal 2021 was a comforting thought indeed. In and around the school, you could almost hear the Form 4s sigh of relief as they counted their lucky stars that they had not been in matric in 2020. In 2021, COVID would be a thing of the past, and it would be business as usual. But little did we know. Unfortunately, during December, the inevitable second wave arrived. This resulted in a disrupted start to the school year. The start of the academic year was delayed by 2 weeks, and once again, COVID restrictions were put in place. In and around the school, you could almost hear the Form 4s of last year asking themselves if this was really happening to them. Despite the academic year being delayed, the school was in the fortunate position of being able to go online and begin the academic program during the 2-week delay. Once schools were allowed to reopen, we were in the fortunate position of allowing all of our boys to return. The commitment from all the teachers and their cooperation and support from all the parents and boys must be acknowledged in this regard. While the academic program of the school was largely uninterrupted, the school's extramural program was once again put on hold. Fortunately, after a month delay, the summer sports season was able to commence, and a number of summer sports fixtures did take place. As the term progressed, further extramural restrictions were lifted, and the school was able to commence with the winter sports program in anticipation of competing against opponent schools in the new term. The excitement in the school was tangible when one considers that not an inter-schools hockey or rugby match had been played in over a year. During the course of the first term, 2 boys tested positive for COVID. The necessary protocols were followed, close contacts were identified, and the school was able to continue largely as normal. 2 teachers and 1 border housemaster tested positive for COVID during the first term. Once again, these cases were handled following all the necessary protocols, and there was minimal disruption to the school. With the necessary protocols and management structures in place, the school is at all times and continues to provide a controlled and safe environment for our staff and boys. The management of this pandemic in a school environment remains a huge responsibility, and I need to compliment and thank all of those who assume this responsibility in this regard. In particular, the school sanatorium sisters, Sister Karina Marie Stevens and Sister Mansell, as well as the school's COVID compliance officer, Mr. Mike Smuts. They have done and continue to do an outstanding job, for which I'm extremely grateful. During the onset of COVID last year, the school, like the rest of the country, was in hard lockdown. With the arrival of the second wave, the school was closed for the December holidays. The arrival of the third wave, however, has proved to be far more challenging, as it's coincided with the start of the second term and the winter sports season. To date this term, the school has had a total of 20 boys test positive for COVID. 4 staff members have tested positive, and we've had a total of 327 close contacts. When one considers that all positive cases and close contacts have to isolate for a minimum of 10 days, you can imagine the disruption both in and outside of the classroom and the effect that this has had on the school. One of the toughest aspects in dealing with all these COVID cases and the arrival of the third wave has been the disruption to the sports program. The first blow came 4 weeks ago when, as a school, we made the decision to postpone the JEPI winter sports fixture due to the first mini outbreak that we had. With 5 boys testing positive and the advent of close contacts, sports practices, or with the advent of contact sports practices, there were a large number of close contacts. This resulted in numerous sports teams being withdrawn and the risk of further boys testing positive. Due to the isolation period and the risk involved, not only was the fixture against Jeppe postponed, but so too was the fixture against King Edward's a week later. After not having played winter sport for over a year, I can assure you that it was not an easy decision to make. To announce to the school at 12 o'clock on the Friday that the fixture you've been so eagerly looking forward to is postponed is no easy task. There were matric boys who couldn't wait to get on the park and represent their school again. The first time in over a year, and this in their final year of school. There were boys who'd been selected to represent the school's first team for the first time. Their Candies jerseys and their red socks were waiting for them in the cupboard. The fact that the juniors in the school of Form 1s and 2s had never had the opportunity of pulling on a Boys High rugby jersey or slipping on their hockey socks is just as disappointing. It's scary to think that should this year's winter sports program not take place, we'll have boys representing our first teams next year who last played for their school in under 14. But as Boys High boys do, they weathered the storm. They put on a brave face as we put our winter sports season on hold for a week in anticipation of realizing their dream of running out onto the fields of gold a week later with a fixture against old rivals Parktown Boys High School. Just as we were regaining our momentum, however, we, together with every other sport-loving school in the country, were dealt another tough blow. On Wednesday, the 19th of May, we were informed that as a result of the ever-increasing number of positive COVID cases in the country, and in particular our province, all contact sport had been suspended. This announcement came 2 days after the school learnt that one of our own had passed away. The news of the passing of Mr. Jaden Kelly, a loyal, dedicated and passionate teacher of our school for the past 14 years, was received with shock and disbelief. In many ways, Mr. Kelly's passing made and continues to make the loss of our winter sports program and all the inconveniences of what COVID has thrown at us seem insignificant. Coupled together, however, it has made the past month extremely tough for the school. In trying to understand for myself what we are dealing with, I had to do some introspection. In doing so, I looked for places where I could find possible answers and understanding. One area I considered was the school. I looked for examples where we as a school have had to experience similar hardships in the past. If we'd overcome these in the past, I'm sure that we'll overcome them again. In terms of COVID, I was once again drawn to the Spanish flu epidemic which gripped the country and impacted on the school in 1918. Not only was the school's sports season temporarily stopped, but more significantly was the severity of the epidemic at the time, which passed through the school and led to the school burying 3 of its pupils, Kenneth Duncan, David Ngela, and Daniel Steinberg. The thought of having to meet the school and announce that we've lost one of our own due to COVID is a far greater challenge than having to announce that our sports season has had to be put on hold. While it does not make the suspension of the sports season any easier, it certainly does give it perspective. Announcing that Mr. Kelly had passed away was no easy task. Once again, I chose to reflect on what similar circumstances past headmasters have had to deal with. In reading from the book Pretoria Boys High School, The Story of a South African School, Chapter 9, Blood, Sweat, Toil and Tears, 1939 to 1945, I was drawn to a paragraph where it is described that in every Friday assembly during this time, Mr. Matheson gave an update on the Second World War. Due to the large number of old boys and staff members representing the country at the time, many of those assemblies included Mr. Matheson having to read the names of past pupils and staff members who'd been killed that week in the war. Well, once again, this does not make Mr. Kelly's passing any easier. It does, for me, give it perspective. What I can say, though, is that through all of this, our boys have been magnificent. They remain resilient. While they're obviously disappointed and frustrated, they've remained positive. Boys High has weathered these sorts of storms before and will weather them again. I continue to believe the lessons learned outside of the classroom remain far more important to our boys than those learned from within. I firmly believe our boys will learn many valuable lessons through these disappointments, which will stand them in good stead going forward. During 2019, through the International Boys Schools Coalition, the school linked up with an organization called Circle of Excellence, and together with 19 other prominent boys' schools in the country, we entered into a research project called Excellence in Boys' School Education. To give you an idea of similar types of schools involved in the research project, were the likes of Glenwood High School, Jeppe, King Edwards, Maritzburg College, Queen's College, Selborne, Rondebosch, Westville, and Wynberg Boys High. A number of private schools that were involved in the project: Hilton College, St. Albans, St. Andrews, and St. John's College. The research assignment focused on 6 critical areas in all boys' schools education. On the 19th of April, the school's executive team met via a conference call from Australia with Dr. Phil Cummins, who ran the project, in order to give us feedback. Pretoria Boys High School achieved an overall score of 68.2%. In the feedback given, Dr. Cummins pointed out that this is the highest score he has ever seen for any school in the many years of research that he's been doing in education. He is of the opinion that if one was looking for the top boys' school in the country, Pretoria Boys High School would be it. He is of the opinion that if one was considering a cluster of top schools in the world, Pretoria Boys High School would be very prominent in this cluster. There are obviously areas where improvement must be implemented. These areas are being identified, and a development plan will be put in place to address them. Having said this, however, it is wonderful for me to be able to share this very positive feedback with you this evening. In reflecting on this feedback, if the truth be told, I do not need a fancy research project to remind me and to inform you that Pretoria Boys High School is a world-class school. I could have in fact saved the Circle of Excellence a whole lot of time and money after having been back at the school for the past 11 months. I could have simply sat with them, with Dr. Phil Cummins, and shared with him my experience in being back at the greatest school in the world. I could have shared with them my experience of the 120-year Founders' Day Assembly held yesterday morning. Having 1,500 boys, all neatly dressed in their Boys High formal uniform, sitting in front of our majestic school buildings, attending an assembly, is a privilege no headmaster of this school should take for granted. Listening to the school's big band, singing an assembly hymn and the school song, and sharing the school prayer is an occasion to be savored. Witnessing this assembly from my vantage point and considering everything that is associated with Founders' Day, I was humbled and again reminded of the responsibility which I've been afforded. 3 weeks ago, the school had the privilege of hosting a 60 and 61 reunion groups as the classes of 1960 and 1961 spent the day at our school. While the entire day was a very special experience for me, it was perhaps summarized by a conversation I had towards the end of the day with one of the wives of an old boy. The lady had not been back to the school since the group's 40-year reunion 20 years before. In this time, she had read much and experienced much with regards to education in South Africa. Her day spent at Boys High simply blew her away. In my conversation with her, she was overcome with emotion as she expressed how she could not believe what she had experienced. She could not believe the facilities and the grounds, the grandeur, size, and condition. She could not believe the school's transformation and diversity. She could not believe our boys, their manners, their politeness, their behavior in assembly, the way they carried themselves during the school day. In my opinion, what she experienced was their authenticity. I believe she saw our school for what it is and our boys for who they are. We do not dress our reunion days up. What our guests experience is the school for what it is. She could not believe that schools such as Boys High still exist in this world, never mind in this country. When I tell you that this lady was overcome with emotion, it is no overstatement, as the tears ran freely. This encounter for me, perhaps more than many others I've experienced in the past 11 months, reminded me and put into perspective for me what a world-class school we have. Gentlemen, the fact that there may only be 60 of us here this evening is irrelevant. The fact that our guest speaker is unable to join us is irrelevant. This is simply a sign of our times, and like we have done for the past 120 years, we will overcome this. What does matter this evening is that there are 60 old boys here, and there are more than 6,000 more out there, all passionate and dedicated about our school. This evening I can assure all of you that Pretoria Boys High School remains a world-class school. And despite whatever challenges come our way, we remain a school we should all be excited about, and a school you should continue to believe in. Thank you very much.